I'm too ugly for my girlfriend. From the moment I met her, I knew she was out of my league. It wasn't just her beauty, which was undeniable, but the way she carried herself, the way she spoke, the way everyone seemed to gravitate towards her. She was everything I thought I could never be: confident, stylish, always poised. I, on the other hand, felt like I was always stumbling through life, barely able to keep up with her world. I often caught myself comparing our appearances, feeling smaller and more out of place by the day. In the early days of our relationship, I tried to hide my insecurities. I did everything I could to be charming, to make her laugh, to show her that there was more to me than my looks. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the fact that I didn't match up to the image I saw of her with the people around us. She was a beacon of light, beautiful, radiant, magnetic, and I was just me. The first few months, everything felt perfect. She seemed to care about me in a way I never expected. She appreciated my kindness, my humor, the way I looked at the world. I thought maybe, just maybe, she didn't care so much about looks. After all, there were moments when she'd tell me how attractive I was, how much she loved spending time with me. Those words, though comforting, never fully sank in. In the back of my mind, there was always this nagging voice telling me that one day, she'd realize the truth, that I wasn't worthy of her, that I was too ugly to be with someone so stunning. It wasn't just the way I felt about my own appearance. It was how others seemed to treat her. When we went out, people always took notice of her, men, mostly. Her beauty would stop conversations, turn heads, make people pause in awe. I would watch her glow in the spotlight, and I couldn't help but feel like a shadow beside her. At times, I would see her talking to someone, laughing effortlessly, and I'd feel a pang in my chest, a silent, knowing feeling that I wasn't enough. I could never give her the attention she deserved, the compliments, the admiration. I wasn't built for that. I wasn't the one that caught people's eye when we entered a room. I was just there. The first time I felt it the most was when we went to a party with some of her friends. They were all beautiful people, model-like figures with perfect hair, designer clothes, and effortless charm. I was the odd one out. My clothes weren't nearly as fashionable, my hair a little too unruly, my face marked with features I never found attractive. Every time I looked around, I felt the eyes of others sweeping over me, not with admiration, but with a sort of confusion. What does she see in him? I'd imagine them wondering. I could feel the invisible distance between us growing, and I couldn't shake the thought that I didn't belong there with her. She noticed too, of course. She would often lean in close, brushing her hand against mine, offering small reassurances that everything was fine. She would smile, telling me how much she loved me, how great I looked. But all I could hear in my mind were the whispers, the doubts, the constant reminder that I wasn't what she deserved. There were moments when I caught her staring at herself in the mirror, adjusting her clothes, making sure her hair was perfect. She did it with such ease, such grace, and I couldn't help but compare myself to her. I wondered if, deep down, she wished she could be with someone who looked like those men who constantly fawned over her, someone who could match her beauty. I often found myself questioning whether I was good enough for her, wondering if my imperfections were too much for her to overlook. As our relationship progressed, I began to withdraw. I stopped initiating dates. I avoided going out to social gatherings. I didn't want her to feel embarrassed or out of place standing next to me. I convinced myself that she was too beautiful to be with someone like me. I started dressing more plainly, avoiding mirrors at all costs, convinced that every flaw in my face, every imperfection, was something she saw and couldn't ignore. The more I hid away, the more I distanced myself from her. I thought maybe, if I could just make myself less noticeable, she wouldn't feel like she was settling for someone who wasn't on her level. And then there were the moments of silence, those quiet spaces when we were alone. She would look at me with those soft, loving eyes, and I would see the worrying on her face. She didn't understand why I had started pulling away. She'd ask me why I was so distant, why I wasn't as affectionate as I used to be. But I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth. I couldn't admit that it was because I was too ugly for her. I couldn't let her know how much I hated the way I looked, how I felt unworthy of the love she was giving me. So, I remained silent, hiding behind my own insecurities, pushing her away without ever saying a word. It came to a head one evening when we were lying in bed, the weight of everything hanging between us like a thick fog. She turned to me, and I could see the sadness in her eyes. It was the first time I felt like I might lose her, not to another man, but to my own self-doubt. She wanted to know what was going on, why I was always pulling away. I could feel the lump in my throat, the tightness in my chest as the truth gnawed at me. I wanted to tell her everything, wanted to confess the fear I'd carried for so long. But the words wouldn't come. She reached out, touching my face gently. Her touch was soft, comforting, yet all I could focus on was how she looked in comparison, so flawless, so perfect. And there I was, standing in the shadow of my own insecurities, too afraid to let her see the truth about how I felt. It wasn't until weeks later, when I had nearly convinced myself that our relationship had no future, that I realized something important. As I watched her one evening, laughing with her friends, looking radiant as always, I finally understood. It wasn't about me being ugly or not good enough for her. It was about how I saw myself. My insecurities had built a wall between us, a wall that I had created from my own perceptions. The love she had for me was real. She didn't care about how I looked. She cared about who I was. But even then, it wasn't that easy. I still struggled to shake off the belief that I didn't deserve her. I wanted to feel worthy of her, but the truth was, I didn't know how. She had given me so much love and patience, but I couldn't stop thinking that there was always something more, something better, that she could have. The weight of my own self-loathing became too much. I realized that the true struggle wasn't about her being too beautiful for me, it was about learning to accept myself, flaws and all. I had to confront my own insecurities and embrace the fact that love wasn't about perfection, it was about acceptance. And yet, as I sat in the quiet of my own thoughts, I still couldn't escape the nagging feeling that maybe, just maybe, I was still too ugly for her. The days dragged on, each one feeling like an endless loop of self-doubt. I tried to focus on the things that used to bring me comfort, working on my hobbies, spending time with friends, keeping busy, but nothing could shake the overwhelming feeling that I was losing something precious. I couldn't stop seeing her in contrast to me. She was the epitome of grace, beauty, and charm, while I felt like I was always stumbling, always falling short. Every time we were together, I caught myself scrutinizing her expressions, looking for signs that she was starting to notice. Was she starting to resent me? Did she secretly think I wasn't good enough for her? The thought gnawed at me like a persistent itch I couldn't reach. There were moments when I'd catch her looking at me, those familiar soft eyes, and for a split second, I felt like she was seeing me for who I really was, the person I couldn't escape from, no matter how hard I tried. The more I felt this, the more I distanced myself. I started avoiding mirrors, avoiding photos, and even avoiding looking at myself in windows when we walked outside. I didn't want to be reminded of the person I saw, someone who felt unworthy of the love I was receiving. How could she be happy with someone like me? How could she truly love someone who wasn't attractive, someone who didn't measure up to the world she lived in? There were nights when I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out when it all became so unbearable. It wasn't just about looks, it was the fact that my own insecurity had started to consume me, overshadowing everything good in my life. I felt like I was suffocating in my own mind, unable to break free from these spiraling thoughts. And the worst part, I couldn't share any of it with her. How could I tell her that I felt like an imposter in my own relationship? How could I explain that I was scared she'd wake up one day and realize that I wasn't the man she deserved? I began withdrawing emotionally, not just physically. I wasn't as affectionate as I used to be, not because I didn't love her, but because I couldn't bear to show my vulnerability. If I let her in too much, she might see the flaws I'd been trying to hide. If she really knew how much I hated myself, would she leave me? Would she realize she could do better? But still, she didn't pull away. She didn't seem to notice. The way I was closing myself off, she still told me she loved me, still did the little things that made my heart skip a beat. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was undeserving of it all. I couldn't shake the belief that I was failing her in some way. Every time she held my hand, I couldn't stop thinking about how my rough skin, my scars, my imperfect body might repulse her. She deserved someone who made her feel seen and admired, someone who could make her feel as beautiful as she truly was. I couldn't be that person, not when I could barely look at myself. And so I spiraled deeper into this world of isolation. I began to avoid intimate moments, pulling away when she tried to get close, not because I didn't love her, but because I didn't know how to let her love me when I couldn't even love myself. There were times when she'd ask me why I was so distant, why I wouldn't kiss her the way I used to or hold her like I once did. But I didn't know how to explain that it wasn't her, it was me. I wasn't strong enough to feel worthy of her love. The more I hid, the more I convinced myself that if I pushed her away first, I wouldn't have to face the inevitable truth that she would leave me anyway. Then, one evening, I watched her as she stood in front of the bathroom mirror, running a brush through her hair, her eyes focused, her face illuminated by the soft light from the vanity. It was in that moment that something inside me snapped. I couldn't do this anymore. Couldn't keep lying to myself. Couldn't keep pretending that I didn't see the way I was pushing her away slowly, almost without realizing it. I couldn't keep letting my insecurities rule every aspect of our relationship. It wasn't fair to her, and it wasn't fair to me. But the truth was, I didn't know where to begin. How could I find a way out of this maze of self-doubt and shame I had built around myself? How could I stop feeling like an imposter in my own life? It wasn't until one evening, when we sat together in the quiet of our living room, the weight of everything hanging between us, that I finally started to see things clearly. She looked at me, her eyes soft, not with pity but with concern. It was as though she knew something was wrong but couldn't figure out what it was. And in that silence, something inside me shifted. I had to face my fear. I had to confront the fact that I was holding on to something that wasn't real, that I wasn't as ugly or unworthy as I thought I was. Wasn't perfect, but no one was. And maybe, just maybe, she loved me for the person I was, not because of how I looked but because of what I gave her emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. For the first time in a long time, I realized that my own perceptions of myself were the only things that had been holding me back. I had allowed my insecurities to become a barrier between us, a barrier that prevented me from fully embracing the love she was offering me. That night, I finally made a decision. I had to start learning to accept myself, flaws and all. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't happen overnight. But I had to try. For myself, for her. The next morning, I woke up with a new sense of resolve. I knew that I couldn't keep running from my insecurities, and I couldn't keep pushing her away because of my fears. The journey towards self-acceptance wasn't going to be linear, but it had to start somewhere. And with that, I finally allowed myself to believe, for the first time in a long while, that maybe I wasn't as ugly as I thought I was. Maybe, just maybe, I was worthy of her love. As days passed, the weight of my insecurities didn't just lift overnight, but it became lighter, little by little. I started trying to change my perspective, not on how I thought I looked, but on how I thought she saw me. I realized that love wasn't a reflection of physical appearances, it was about connection, care, and the small moments of understanding between two people. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of doubt. Moments where I looked at myself in the mirror and cringed at the imperfections that seemed so glaring to me. But I reminded myself that I wasn't the only one with flaws. I began to see her through different eyes, not just the flawless beauty I had once placed on a pedestal, but as someone who had chosen me. Chosen me, despite everything I thought wasn't good enough. I started making small efforts to shift my mindset. I would tell myself that I was worthy of love, not because of how I looked, but because of who I was. That I had so much to offer beyond my appearance, and that she saw that. She saw me. Every compliment she gave me, every tender moment we shared, I tried to embrace fully, even though it made me uncomfortable at first. I still struggled with the urge to retreat at times. There were moments when I felt I wasn't enough, when I couldn't understand why someone like her would choose someone like me, but I tried to be present, to acknowledge the love that she showed me without undermining it with my insecurities. I started to let her in, just a little more each time. One night, as we sat on the couch together, my heart was heavy with everything I had been feeling, everything I had been hiding. I realized that I hadn't been honest with her, not about how much I loved her, but about how much I had struggled with my self-image, how much I had pushed her away because I didn't believe I was worthy of her. It wasn't easy, wasn't something I was ready for, but in that moment, I felt the pressure of keeping up this mask slip away. I felt the weight of the facade I had been holding up crumble, and I found the courage to be vulnerable. I reached out and took her hand, feeling a rush of emotion wash over me. There were still a million things I didn't know how to say, but I knew that if I didn't start being real with myself and with her, then nothing would ever change. I opened my mouth, but the words stuck for a moment, as if I had to convince myself that it was okay to speak them, but then I took a deep breath. I realized that even though I might never fully stop battling with my insecurities, I couldn't let them ruin the best thing that had ever happened to me. I didn't need to be perfect. I just needed to be honest. It was an ongoing struggle. My self-esteem wasn't something I could simply flip a switch to fix, and there were still moments of doubt that crept in, but each day, I felt a little more, been so wrapped up in my own self-doubt that I couldn't see that. In time, I started to see myself not through the lens of my imperfections, but through the lens of my worthiness. I began to understand that love doesn't come with conditions tied to how we look or how we measure up to others. Love is about connection, trust, and being able to be our true selves, even when we're scared to show that side. There were still moments when the old doubts crept in, when I felt myself slipping back into old habits of pushing her away, of second-guessing her love for me. But I knew that I didn't have to let those thoughts control me anymore. I had to choose to trust her, to trust myself, and to trust that love wasn't just about appearance. It was about the person inside, the person who was worthy, who was loved, and who had a future together with someone who saw past the surface. Eventually, I came to a quiet understanding with myself. I didn't have to be perfect, and neither did she. We didn't need to have everything figured out to be happy together. We just needed to be real. And in that rawness, in that honesty, we found something more beautiful than any idealized version of love, something that was entirely our own. As the weeks turned into months, the quiet transformation continued. It wasn't that I woke up one day and suddenly had all my insecurities erased, but I started to embrace the idea that I wasn't broken. I wasn't flawed in the way I had convinced myself I was. Realized that even though I still had moments of doubt, the relationship wasn't about perfection, it was about the willingness to try, to be vulnerable, and to grow together. We began to share more experiences, pushing past the walls I had built. I noticed the way she looked at me when I wasn't hiding, when I wasn't trying to put on a facade. It was as if she was seeing me for the first time, not through the lens of my imperfections, but through the way I interacted with the world, the way I made her laugh, the way I showed up for her. One of the first times I truly felt a shift was when we went on a weekend trip. It was a quiet, peaceful getaway to the mountains, just the two of us, and for the first time in a while, I wasn't hyper-aware of myself. There was no rush to get ready, no pressure to look a certain way, no distractions. We simply spent our days hiking, exploring the beauty around us, and enjoying the moments without the weight of my doubts hanging over me. That was when I realized how much I had been holding back. How much I had kept to myself, afraid of letting her see the parts of me that felt broken. Yet, here I was, on this trip, with no pretense, no walls between us. I wasn't trying to look perfect. I was just being me, and it felt freeing. Later that evening, after a long day of hiking, we sat on the porch of our little cabin, watching the sunset. The air was cool, and there was something peaceful about the moment, as if the weight of everything I had been carrying had finally started to lift. She sat next to me, our hands touching, and I realized just how much I had taken for granted in the past, the simple act of holding her hand, feeling her warmth beside me. I hadn't fully appreciated it until I allowed myself to let go of my insecurities and just be. The journey to self-acceptance wasn't linear. It wasn't about magically feeling confident all the time or suddenly becoming someone I wasn't, but it was about learning to give myself grace. It was about slowly understanding that the things I saw as flaws were actually parts of who I was, parts that made me real. And as I let go of my need to constantly compare myself to others, I started to see that love didn't depend on being perfect. It depended on being willing to show up as who you are and trust that the other person would love you for that, flaws and all. I also began to see the strength in the love she offered me. I had spent so long thinking I wasn't good enough for her that I failed to realize how much she truly cared for me. It wasn't about the clothes I wore, the way I looked in photos, or the moments when I felt less than perfect. She loved me for my heart, for my mind, for my quirks and imperfections. And as I began to see that, I allowed myself to love her back in a way I hadn't before, fully, without reservation. There were still moments of self-doubt, of course. The world around me was full of standards and expectations, and sometimes I still struggled with comparing myself to others. But instead of letting those feelings control me, I started to challenge them. I reminded myself that I didn't have to meet anyone else's expectations of beauty or worthiness. I just had to be the best version of myself for me and for her. The more I worked on myself, the more I realized that our relationship wasn't about me being someone I wasn't. It was about us being real with each other, facing our own flaws, and accepting them together. And through that, we created something deeper than I had ever imagined, a love that wasn't rooted in appearances, but in the raw honesty we shared. A love that allowed us both to grow, to learn, and to support each other through the challenges that life inevitably brought. In time, I became more confident in who I was. I still had insecurities, but they no longer defined me. They no longer dictated how I acted in our relationship or how I saw myself in the world, and as I began to shed the weight of my self-doubt, I saw our love for what it truly was, a partnership. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was more than enough. Looking back, I could see how far I had come. From a person who couldn't accept himself to someone who was learning to embrace every part of who he was, flaws and all. And through it all, she had stood by me, not because I was perfect, but because we had chosen each other. She had always seen me as more than just my appearance, and I finally understood that the love we shared wasn't conditional on how I looked or how I saw myself. It was about what we gave to each other, what we built together, and the understanding that we were enough as we were. We had grown together, not just in love, but in acceptance. And that was the kind of love I had been searching for all along, the kind that didn't require perfection, but instead embraced the beauty of the imperfect journey we were on together.